Recently in Georgia and Alabama, some fairly restrictive, I shouldn't say fairly, some pretty damn restrictive bills were passed on the issue of abortion. The story we have is the first story in this segment we have is from Pluralist. Angry feminists launch purge against white women over Alabama abortion bill. You did this. When I was younger, I've always been pro-choice, and I've always had conversations with people about the issue, but I've always tried to really understand and listen to those who are pro-life or religious or conservative, because I don't think I'm the smartest person in the world, and if I want to truly have the correct approach, I need to hear what other people have to say and truly understand this. And one of the craziest things to me was how you'd hear a lot of women say, men are trying to regulate our bodies. And that was confusing to me. I understand it's mostly dudes in politics. In Alabama, for instance, it was, I think, 23 men and 3 women or something. But those men are elected by women. There are women who vote for these individuals who are pro-life. And in the instance of, I believe, Georgia, more white women voted for Kemp, is that Georgia, than white men did. So certainly there are women who are not pro-choice. It is not an issue of men. It is an issue of ideology. So now we can see in this very strange photograph, angry feminists, well, if you're listening, you can't see it, but they're dressed like it's the Purge with clown masks on or something. It seems like they finally realized that they are pro-life women. Strangely, though, they've only gone after the white women. So the story reads, the Alabama Senate approved a measure on Tuesday that would outlaw almost all abortions in the state, and advocates of women's rights declared a national crisis. Activists and journalists sought to shame the 22 Republican senators who voted against including an exception for force and family relations. I have to be careful about speech because this is up on the... while you guys know I typically try to avoid using certain words, I'm also now putting this up as a podcast on Podcast Network, so that gives me a lot more restrictions, but you understand what I'm trying to say. Pointing out that they were all white men. However, the racial politics also turned inward and threatened to undermine feminists' united front on the issue. Most prominently, Women's March leader Linda Sarsour pointed to what she said was the complicity of white women in Georgia's heartbeat bill, which Governor Brian Kemp signed into law last week, seemingly dismissing most of her allies in opposing the law. Sarsour faulted white women for voting for Kemp in even higher numbers than white men. That's where the work needs to happen. WW continued to uphold the patriarchy, white women, she declared on Twitter, seemingly continuing her attempt to purge white women from the movement. What we can see here in this tweet, it's actually really interesting. 32%, white women made up 32% of Brian Kemp's voters at 76%. And 28% of men made up Brian Kemp's voter with 73. Okay, so let me try and set this over. 73% of white men voted for Kemp. 76% of white women voted for Brian Kemp. More white women than white men voted for Kemp. I would actually argue if the women are the majority, then it's not men trying to legislate your bodies, it's women. Now, it does break down, further from there. Black men and black women overwhelmingly supported Abrams, but Kemp still won out on this issue. Although others, I don't know what other refers to. Is that because they don't give Asians a category? Linda Sarsour says, while folks are debating tactics to respond to Georgia's heartbeat bill, let's remember that 76% of the white women electorate in GA, more than white men, voted for Brian Kemp over Stacey Abrams. That's where the work needs to happen. Sarsour's fellow feminists echoed her sentiment, with many angrily citing white women's disproportionate support for President Donald Trump in 2016 and for failed Republican candidate for U.S. Senate Roy Moore in 2017. Some said that black women would be most affected by the legislation, which bans abortions at every stage of pregnancy and criminalizes the procedure for doctors who could be charged with felonies and face up to 99 years in prison. Others noted that black women are 3 times as likely as white women to die due to complications related to pregnancy. The Alabama bill includes an exception for cases when the mother's life is at serious risk, but not for cases of force or family relations to be, I don't know, whatever. The female feminists were not without allies. Some black men agreed that white women are part of the problem. Let me stop here and make a point about, the increase in racial identity rhetoric and things like this. What we can see here is that the narrative and the conflict is breaking down on racial lines, not gender lines. Like I mentioned earlier, women used to say it's men regulating their bodies, but now it's white people regulating the bodies of others. And they're saying the risk is on black women. it's becoming a racial issue. I don't think that's going to be a good thing. I think that's actually a really bad thing, but let's read on. Transgender woman journalist Caitlin Burns spoke out for transgender men, who she said have less access to abortions than biological women. Even white liberal women got on board. Looking forward, one woman indignantly predicted that Alabama's female governor, Kay Ivey, would sign the bill into law, though she has yet to commit to doing so. It's really, really interesting, actually. So the story goes on for quite a bit, but there's I want to move on to the next issue, the next story in this segment, and it's kind of weird, but it's also from Pluralist. Alyssa Milano reveals abortion bill made her so mad she cracked the screen on her phone, but it's because she threw her phone at the wall. Look, I think it's a silly thing to report on, but it I guess we'll add it to the story because look, people are really, really angry. I'm going to have to say, Alyssa, why are you throwing your phones? And apparently it wasn't even Alyssa Milano by herself. Other women were chiming in talking about how they dropped or threw their phones. And it's like, if something in a state you don't live in makes you this mad, I think you need to chill and take a step back. I understand. These are serious issues, right? Georgia and Alabama have passed a very restrictive law that's likely, many people believe, is going to go to the Supreme Court. I saw a really good comment made on Reddit where they said, the law isn't meant to actually pass muster. It's meant to create a challenge which will find its way to the Supreme Court and overturn Roe v. Wade. And that's a serious, serious issue that's going to impact many, many women. So I understand why people are angry. I would just say, don't throw your phone. It's kind of, let's read this. They say, amid an ongoing debate over women's rights, actress Alyssa Milano informed her legions of followers that her fury over reports of various state bills aimed at curtailing abortion caused her to throw her phone across the room. The force of the throw was apparently so great that Milano said it cracked the screen on her device. But this is actually not just in reference to the bill. It's in reference to an 11-year-old assault victim, right? So she got, that I can understand. It's a bit different. So let's make sure we frame this properly. Several commentators were sympathetic, revealing that they too had similarly damaged their apparatuses in frustration. Just dropped mine for the same reason. Off to replace it tomorrow. A simple resolution for my issue in comparison to this 11-year-old child. There are no words. Keep up the fight and faith, Alyssa. I'm going to have to point out, though, if you're not going to be sympathetic to the anger someone faces or feels when you have a story about a pregnant 11-year-old, yeah, look, man, I can definitely empathize and sympathize with someone throwing their phone. I do want to stress, yeah, come on, I get it, calm down. I'm not trying to be a dick when I say that. I mean it seriously. But this is kind of a crazy story if you haven't been following. This is over in Ohio. We are seeing these laws pass in a bunch of states. So I guess the predictions were right. A lot of women said that there will be the overturning of Roe v. Wade. We're not there yet. But with all of these states passing these laws, it's entirely possible. Now, for those of you who know me and you watch my content, you know that I'm pro-choice. And it's, I would call it begrudgingly, and it's on libertarian grounds. Not too dissimilar to Dave Rubin's argument, but I'm not entirely familiar with his argument is for the most part. But for me, it really just comes down to government restriction on medical procedures. However, there are some really interesting points that are made by the pro-life side, and I hear them. I definitely do, because I don't believe abortion as contraception is right. But I also don't think it should be an issue for the government to determine when you shouldn't have someone performing a medical procedure. But it is pointed out that most abortions are done as contraception, right? So it is a challenge. But for me, it's going to come down to, look, man, I don't want the government telling somebody that they should have to provide their body to someone else, because you do have issues like this 11-year-old girl. And I would rather err on the side of making sure the 11-year-old victim doesn't get put in the situation. It's tough. It really is. I don't think I'm the arbiter of morality. I don't think I know everything. I don't think I'm right. But this is why I'm kind of moderate on a lot of issues, because I don't necessarily know what is right and what is wrong. A lot of people like to say centrists just don't know what they're talking about, or they don't have an opinion. That's not true. I have opinions. It's just that trying to solve these problems is difficult, and I'm trying to work with everybody to figure out what's the right thing to do. So I think I can, throwing your phone across the room and cracking the screen, yeah, don't do that. But it's a serious story. We also have a couple more just quick shout-outs real quick before I sign off on this video. Nancy Pelosi and Elizabeth Warren are both calling this a major issue, but They're right. Elizabeth Warren says this ban is dangerous and exceptionally cruel, and the bill's authors want to use it to overturn Roe v. Wade. Naturally, you're going to have a lot of pro-life people saying, yup, and they're happy about it. You're going to have the left being very, very upset about it. I think it's a dangerous territory. I got to say, I'm apprehensive on the passing of these bills. It's going to get dangerous. It's going to be bad. And a lot of this is settled, right? I get it. But you know what? Here's what happens. There's an ebb and flow to politics. And for the longest time, we had precedent. The precedent can be overturned. Precedent has been overturned. So I guess I would say this. The pro-lifers are probably cheering, and the pro-choice people are probably freaking out. And I can only say, I guess, for me, I do find this worrisome. I do. But I've done a ton of videos talking about my position on choice and life. And I hate rehashing the issue every time I make a video. So we'll leave it at that. Suffice it to say, my position is slightly center-left pro-choice, but it is rather nuanced. I am not oblivious to the arguments made by the right. I have listened a great deal to Ben Shapiro. I actually agree with a lot of what he says on the issue. I believe life begins at conception. But it is a moral challenge that can't be solved simply by saying it is or isn't. There are a lot of people on the left that I think don't think about the true nature and what's really going on. And there are a lot of people on the right who are very absolutist on this, but I can't just be on one side. I can't just say I know exactly what's right and what's wrong. What I do know is I don't like the idea of government being involved in people's medical choices, especially when it pertains to someone having to provide their body to someone else. It is complicated. I'd love to have a greater conversation with it, at a different point, but for now we'll leave it there. Main point before I sign off on this segment is that it's not just men, okay? Can we please just stop the narrative of men controlling women? It is about people. More women voted for Kemp, okay? And then, so if that's the case, you want to play the game, we'll say then women are controlling women's bodies. Well, then it's kind of confusing. The issue is people disagree. We need to work together and figure out where we can unify or compromise. Of course, people don't want to compromise, and for good reason. People on the pro-life side are saying compromise on the harm to babies. Yeah, never going to happen. And I hear you. I understand your position. And people on the left saying compromise on the right for women to be free from the government control. And it's, you know what, man? It's a tough issue. Maybe one of the most difficult moral conundrums I've ever had to deal with, and I don't know the answers. And that's one of the reasons I err on the side of choice. Just keep the government out of it. For the most part, there's a line. Let's figure out where it is. I'll leave it there. I got one more video coming up for you in a few minutes, and if you're listening, stick around. It's coming up now.